So
Yeah.
welcome, everyone. If you tuned in earlier, the first and second times that kind of cut out, sorry about that. We're just learning this. This is our first try. This is the beta version of Quintasonic Brass Live. My name's Jason Dovel. I play trumpet in this group, and I teach at the University of Kentucky.
I'm Vince DiMartino, and I play trumpet as well. And I taught at University of Kentucky for 21 years and Centre College for 19. And I'm retired now, and I'm lucky enough to play in this wonderful group, the Quintasonic Brass.
And I am Matthew Haislip, and I teach at Mississippi State University.
My name is Alex Van Duuren. I'm the trombonist in the group and the professor of trombone at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
Hey, world and Quintasonic Brass. My name is Alex Lapins, and I teach at University of Tennessee along with Dr. Van Duuren. And welcome. It's great to see everybody again. And this is a quintet that started a few years ago, but I think we can talk a little bit about how we didn't just sort of all meet up one day. There's a lot of connections in our past. So, Jason, you want to talk a little bit about the Blue Lake connection?
Sure. So back, about 10 years ago, I taught at Blue Lake Summer Fine Arts Camp. And part of the job there was to play in the faculty brass quintet. And my two colleagues, Alex Lapins and Matt Haislip, were in that group. We had a great time playing at Blue Lake together and had talked about trying to keep that group together. And this group is in some ways a fruit of those discussions.
Yeah, I don't think we're live right now.
My computer just told me we went dead. We're still recording. I'm gonna try to get it live again.
All right. So this is now a video we can post.
That's right.
Yeah. The Blue Lake was a really great connection. Of course, when I came out to Tennessee from Arizona, I was just looking to sort of reestablish some connections with people in the area and looking for friendly faces that were within striking distance. And that was not long after Jason had come to his new job at Kentucky. And I got to tell you, if you've never gotten to make chamber music with Jason, you're missing out, because it is a really special thing to sit down and to be his support system, to have him supporting you. It's really a tremendous thing. And we kind of spread out for there. Hey, Alex, let's see. You had a bunch of quintet experience before Quintasonic as well. What kind of got you into the whole quintet world?
Yeah, I was really lucky enough to be in an area in Seminole, Florida, which is in Pinellas County, that has really a great many great players came out of that area. Way more than the average, the standard deviation of musicians coming out of one county. And we had a really good youth symphony. And then on top of that, we just sort of put together this youth brass quintet, which is, in my experience now, relatively rare. And we put together this brass quintet.
Marty.
Hey, man. How are you?
Good. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Marty, it's nice to meet you. We're just sort of getting things going, man. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Awesome.
It's happy hour, so, you know.
Absolutely.
We are going to record our talk because Facebook Live is not working at the moment. So we will record this and upload it later.
Okay.
Sorry. Alex, you were saying, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, so the quintet was coached by Carolyn Wall, who's a horn player in the Florida Orchestra, and I was fortunate enough to have a really high-level experience as a junior in high school in brass quintet, and then ever since then, I played in brass quintet basically every year of my existence since then, including now in both this group and the UT faculty brass quintet. So it's just something I love doing.
Awesome. Well, hey, Marty.
Hey, man.
Such an inspiration to us. In fact, my office is now going to be...
Uh-oh. Oh, there you go.
We can see. There we go.
Yeah. That was a few years ago.
Well, such an inspiring album and set of albums from the Empire Brass. I mean, that, to me, as a quintet player, that's the sound. And that's what I try to achieve is trying to sound like you sounded in the quintet.
Oh, thanks. I mean, it was a interesting experience. I mean, the sound of that, the group had its sound when I joined it, but I had morphed as a player through the Canadians, through the 3.5 years I was with the Canadians, quite a bit. For me as a horn player, I was raised on a Con 8D, big mouthpieces, big sound. That was what you did back in those days. That was it. And then there was Dennis Brain, and there was somebody called Tuckwell that come along. But other than that was. And then you had your Myron Bloom, which was like, what was that? So that's what I was raised with. So you join the Canadian Brass, and I started with the big mouthpiece and the crispy design horn, which is a Brass in Berlin was recorded on. And I very quick. Huh?
That album's on my wall too.
Yeah, it was a great album. But anyway, so you certainly had to become a lot more efficient, equipment-wise and playing-wise. You changed, or you actually changed, or you died. And in this case, because there was a lot of money at stake and a lot of pressure, there was no question. It wasn't that if you're going to do it, it's like, how are you going to do it? So I changed quite a bit. And by the time I got to the Empire, I had my particular style of that quintet playing, which was very efficient, very strong, very focused, but not. I tried not to be tight. I tried to be light. And if you really listen to those groups, both of those groups, very carefully, I mean, when you know how it is, you guys all know, when you put on the recording, the sound is right here. Forte, piano, it's all right here, 6 feet in front of your face, or a foot, whatever. The dimension is there. It changes color and size a little bit, but if you listen very carefully, even to the live performances that we did in those groups, and I'm sure you guys have figured out empirically, pardon the pun, we played soft. The mezzo forte was really what we would consider, if you're playing an etude or a study, mezzo piano. That was our go-to language. And so everything was dialed down a notch so that when we did turn up the heat, you could really tell. And also, hey, wait for it, you could survive 2.5 hours a night of playing impossible shit. So, and then that was just like understood. But I found it really difficult when I coached brass quintets to say, guys, you realize everybody's playing poco forte? And you're working really hard, still complaining the horn can't be heard. And the trumpets are competing like, I gotta be heard, and the trombones going like, I can't be heard, and the tuba's like, I don't give a fuck, I'm just gonna play loud. And so it's like, and as soon as you get everybody to play half the dynamic, just like invariably when I get people to play half, just play this phrase, everybody cut the dynamic in half. Everybody did it equally, so therefore everybody can be heard, and wait for it, you're working less. So it was a really interesting experience to do those quintets and to get that. But that sound, if you listen very carefully, the vast majority of the time, 2/3 of the time, the group is playing mezzo piano. Now it doesn't sound like it because the mic is there. The mic picks it up, but the quality of the sound is like very light.
That's really interesting. Marty, my name's Alex Lapins. I'm the trombone.
Yeah, Alex.
I was just I'm curious if when you were doing live playing and it wasn't the case that you could play at that mezzo piano level, did you find that was almost then bizarre to go change, or were you doing
no we always played that way.
Yeah,
but we had a vibrancy of sound that didn't need to project. It didn't need to play loud. And when we did want a mezzo forte or fortissimo or more, it was huge. The other thing was I've never quite understood the Empire Brass. I don't know how many people you've seen some videos, I guess. The way we sat was the most efficient way for a brass quintet to be. And most brass quintets still sit in the little horseshoe, staring at one another, blowing into each other's bells, having no facial contact, and no body language for the audience. Worse than a string quartet, because you've got a string quartet with a tuba in it. So it's like we stood, I mean, the way, just to reiterate, so those of you who might not know, when you were in the audience, first person on your right was Sam. He sat on a piano bench, but his bell was going out, so you could really hear it clearly. He could play very soft, but you heard him clearly. Then trombone, Scott was there. He was pointing straight out. Next to him was Rolf. Next to him was Jeff. Those three people were in a line, pointing straight out at you. And then I was on the end, and I could adjust my bell to be open or closed to the audience depending on the dynamic that I wanted. And the trumpets and trombone and those guys could adjust there. If they wanted a super soft thing, they simply played it into the stand a little bit. But if we wanted to unleash hell, man, you had 5 instruments going right in your face equally, and you had contact with the audience. They could see your body language, not just your waist up, but your whole body move and smile and respond to people. And they saw facial expressions, and it's a much more pleasing thing to see people standing than sitting. So, and which is why the Canadians usually did the majority of their stuff the same way. So it's I can't get across, but I'll coach a brass quintet, and they'll all agree, and it sounds much better. I come back the next time they're sitting down. Okay.
Yeah, well, I've tried that setup myself with numerous student ensembles, and when you take a recording of it, everyone kind of really enjoys the clarity out front. I think it's just that it's just different and it's weird, and people want to come back to their comfort zones. But did you ever find that there was any trouble like listening across the group in that setup? I mean, it didn't.
No, not really, because again, if you're playing kind of soft, and also when you're standing, less is coming off the floor. More is going to the ambient room. Therefore, your sound can be a little more isolated. Therefore, you can track over there. And so we didn't have any problem. If you're standing, your sounds are more, they can't be close, because when you're standing, you can actually stand closer than you can sit if you want, especially the instruments that are going straight out, the trumpet, trombone, etc. And so we could make the group expand and contract, whatever. So we really made sure that we could really hear one another. But we never found any problems with it. You know, it made all the sense acoustically, and we did it all the time. So I don't know, I just got used to it. And so when I went back in the orchestra in Vancouver, we played, and in the National Symphony we played classic quintet stuff. And I was like, guys, really? You know, we're playing for ourselves here. You can't play for yourselves. That's what we're doing. When you sit in that formation, you're playing for yourselves. Oh, I can't see you. Well, every time I coach a quintet, I have every person in the quintet stand in the far corner of the room, turn your back so you cannot see one another. You cannot see. Now, I said, you're going to start your piece and only do it by the feel of hearing the breath of somebody breathe. And you're going to do it. Without fail, they nail it. Bang. Because they're using their ear instead of trusting. It's the same thing, you know, we all see that the quintet's like, let's cut off the note. You don't need to fucking cut off the note. You can tell when it's going to end. You know, those groups didn't do it. Rolf would never do that in 1,000 years. You know? So
kind of in line with that, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, for students who are now socially isolated, how can they work on their chamber music skills during this time?
Gosh, I mean, I don't have the skills. All the people that are layering things and playing at the same time, I guess you record and you have a click track and stuff. I don't know. I mean, I don't. Beyond that, and that's not really playing together. That's right. Playing at the same time, which is better than nothing. I mean, I'm getting my kids to. For chamber music, there's not much I can do with chamber music. I'm getting my kids I'm assigning each of them every week or two, every other week, some weird orchestral piece. Like I got a couple people doing Bruckner 8, and these are undergrads, you know. So I said, here, download all the parts. I got all the parts for you. Find a recording, and I want you to play through the entire Bruckner 8 symphony.
Wow.
Pick a horn part. They get good quality FaceTime. They're learning a piece. You know, like some of them who are a little cocky, I said, yeah, you know some Strauss. How about Domestica? You know Domestica? No. I said, okay, there you go. Here's the music.
How about Salome? Let's play through Salome.
Exactly. Salome is a good example. You know, just you can, because that international, this series, you guys have this series?
I don't actually have it, but yeah, that's
it's an amazing series. The ones that I have over 610 complete orchestral works of all the horn parts, clean, everything. So I uploaded it on the website of the Rue Horns, and so I said, okay, go there and get, you know, Mahler 4. Play Mahler 4. I want to hear Mahler 4. So they have quality time. So, you know, it's a chamber music. I don't know what to do with chamber music, though, because chamber music has to be a living and breathing cell. And it's really cool. People are, you know, doing the choirs and the orchestras all playing together. But it's not chamber music.
You know, one of the things that I'm really trying to instill with my students is to listen a lot. Because, you know, like you were saying about the Empire Brass group sound, that's one of the things that really stuck out to me is that it's this beautiful round sound that you can identify on a recording like that. I mean, and it doesn't have like a angular sticking out of voices. It's a constant, the epitome of balanced blended sound.
And it was because and that's just the way when I joined the group. It mainly came from Sam and somewhat Rolf, and then when they plugged in the different second trumpet players and stuff. And Dave was a chamber player. He was a more confined player, more than I was. But I realized they had a certain go-to personality, that sound. But it was basically gentle. It was basically soft, and it was basically well articulated, and nobody competed. So it was very contained all the time. We always maintained this. Let's just keep it here, keep it in control. And if everybody's soft, then we all have a chance to like very minutely adjust the volume, adjust the bring this line out. It's easy to do. But if everybody's playing too loud, you can't adjust anything. So that's what that inspired that sound, which is why it sounded so light.
But Marty, if you're not competing, how do you know who wins the quintet?
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't. That's a good question. I mean, the trumpets always had to be like, yes, dear, but you know how it is. You tell them what they want to hear, and you do what you need to do.
Marty, your work in both quintets. I mean, this is foundational for me. That's where my love of quintet really started, was with Canadian Empire. I'm wondering, because those are two pretty pioneering groups, and they weren't always around. So what do you see as some of the foundation? Like who were you? Who were the other Empire and Canadian players listening to? What sort of things were listening to as this idea of virtuosic and crowd engaging brass quintets?
Who were they? Who were we listening to?
Yeah, you, them, the people that were, just who do you see as like foundational for Empire and Canadian brass?
Basically, it was the New York Brass Quintet, as pathetic as that is. I mean, it was sad. It was a start, but I mean, it wasn't anything special. But the Canadians and I think it's one of the reasons those two groups did so well is because we had no foundation, we had no glass ceiling, and we simply wanted to make a living, and no one said you can't do that, or you have to do it this way. Nowadays, because of the Empire and Canadians and numerous other groups, it's like, well, that's not quite as good as that, and that so-and-so does that better. In those days, we just tried not to suck. That was it. That was our criteria. We had to
off.
Yeah, and we wanted to play music. We really wanted to play music. In regards to the Canadians, they wanted to make it a brass group that was very entertaining, and of course they pulled that off brilliantly for decades and decades. The Empire wanted to be a super musical group like a string quartet, but with the energy of brass, and there were no rules. We were both with the same management, Columbia Management, and two different floors in New York. So it was a little awkward at times because the agents would change, but we didn't listen to anybody. We didn't have any resources. They just made it up. The Canadians, they were desperate. They had some management in Canada that sent them out, and they would go across. I remember, I think it was Chuck or Ronnie told me that in the early days, they went through a tour of Saskatchewan. Now, Saskatchewan has how many, 5 towns in it, and it's the size of Mexico. So Saskatchewan, they toured for 3 weeks and didn't ever play the main sounds. They played, I don't know what they played. They said they just played little libraries and stuff all of the time. So they developed this whole show because they wanted to be entertaining themselves and entertain other people along the way. And they realized, if we kind of do the shtick that they developed so brilliantly, but we didn't have anybody listening to. I mean, really, German brass wasn't around then. Philip Jones came along soon after that, but that was around the same time. Dan would probably know. Dan's been around since the Earth Cool. You could ask him.
He certainly has.
Hey,
Mr. P. Well, Marty, I was just wondering if there was any chamber music outside of brass quintet. Did you do a lot of trio playing? I mean, you guys have so much more rep than a tuba player would have. Was chamber music a big thing for you before you got into the Canadian?
Yeah, I played all sorts of chamber music, everything I could find. And when I went back to Vancouver after the quintets, I actually ran a chamber music group for the CBC, which we did 4 concerts a year, and It was called Curio, and it was featuring unique chamber music that was nobody knows from any different period. And they had a budget of $100,000 a year for that, but it featured music that was. We had a theme, it could be French or whatever, something with voice, but it involved a different composer and a different combination of musicians for every piece on every concert. So it was, and I have it all recorded. I digitalized the whole thing. So I did a lot of chamber music, a little before, but when I came back, it was more creative, like on these veins, and then trying to do more stuff. And in those days, the CBC, I was so lucky to be in Canada because. Like I went to there was a really good voice person, soprano, a mezzo soprano. What was her name? I can't remember her name. Anyway, so she was there, and so I said, hey, so I did a bunch of research and came up with a ton of things for horn, voice, and piano, ton of stuff. And they CBC, yeah, do a show, fine, okay, we'll record a whole concert. So I was really lucky, so I could throw them ideas like that. So. I love chamber music and every kind of combination of it. My second ex was a horn player, and she wanted to play something, so I found everything under the sun for two horns and a bassoon, which was her good friend. We did a whole CD of that. It's actually pretty cool music. Nothing is.
When I think about your music collection, it's really remarkable. Unbelievable amount of music that you own, and really, to me, it seems like. Just like in Canadian and Empire, you didn't have any limits. You could do anything on the instrument. So it's like you were constantly looking through rep, finding the next ceiling.
Yeah, that's the reason I did the New Age stuff, which never got put out. That's the reason I put out the high and low book, because I wanted something to do, create, stuff. For the high and low book, I put those out for myself originally because I couldn't play high and I couldn't really play low very well. So I thought, okay, let's put that out, and so I did it for myself, and then I published it, and it's still going around. So no, I didn't have ceilings at the end. I worked really hard to get there. Everybody thinks like, oh, I must have been a whiz kid or something. No, not at all. I wasn't a natural at all. I trained myself to be a natural. I was always looking. I didn't have any ceilings, so I was always just trying to like, what can we do?
Yeah, I
want to make sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that we all welcome the Godfather, Dan Perantoni.
Yay, Dan!
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. You're looking good, man. Yeah. Nice drink too.
Oh yeah, it's happy hour every place,
There you go.
Yeah, for sure. So how are you doing?
I'm doing terrific, except we're sitting in home and teaching online.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Zoom is not the greatest when you're trying to do it overseas. So anyway, we're surviving.
Yeah, exactly. That's survival. That's the word,
There you go.
But I'm getting used to the online teaching, and sometimes depending on the internet connection. And I had a lot of people using the computers, but one girl, she just has a Samsung phone. My God, the picture and the quality of the video is awesome. It's so much better than anything else, and it's just her phone, Samsung.
Did you do a FaceTime with her?
No, she's just doing it through Zoom.
Yeah, and I have students in China, and I'm using WeChat.
Oh.
And so and it works okay, but the delay is like that's a problem.
Yeah, it's true.
I can't wait till we get back to the real thing.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing what face-to-face humanity. What it does for you.
Yeah, it's going to be so good when it comes back. Hey, Dan, they were asking me, like, when I was with the Canadians and Empire, what groups did we listen to like, and I was just saying, there was nobody. You had New York Brass Quintet, basically, and later on, as we were going forward, you had your German Brass appear and Philip Jones, but there was nobody really around, right? Or was there someone else besides New York?
I only thing I know about was Philip Jones and New York Brass Quintet. Yeah. In fact, I was a sophomore at Eastman, and the New York Brass Quintet came, played a concert, blew me away. And I remember saying to myself, boy, that's what I would like to do. And it was sort of like a start of my really good interest in chamber music. Because back then, all we had to play in the brass quintet is Ewald 1, and that's about it,
Oh, don't forget Bangles Angle Eater.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Come on, that's like a
All right.
anthem, you know.
Well, we ought to welcome John to the party as well.
John Foster.
Hey, John.
Hi,
Hey,
John.
how you doing, guys?
I see in Australia the world's a little different, right? When it turned about 90 degrees.
Like this.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Yeah.
I was good to see everybody. I was in a quintet since ever since I went to Eastman, and my coach was Vern Reynolds.
Wow.
And so actually it was great because all the things that the Eastman Brass Quintet was doing, when they were done, he'd throw it to our quintet and we'd try to tackle it, you know, and of course he was the coach. So, you know.
How was he as a coach? I didn't get a chance to know Vern very well.
Great. You know, if you didn't know him, we used to call him Stern Vern.
Right, that's what I knew him as, yeah.
Well, he was. I mean, you know, you'd be in a jury, and his idea of you playing well was this.
Yeah.
Give you the eyebrows. That meant you did pretty well. That was about as much as you're going to get out of him. But when you played in my sophomore year, you know, everybody was just afraid of him. But when he was a quintet coach, he was a whole different person. And I imagine he was like that in lessons too. He was so engaged in what you were doing and how you were playing the music, whether it was his quintet or some of the transcriptions that he did, or some of the more standard literature that was developing at the time, you know, and the Boza and all the other things that we started to really, you know, grab at, and Malcolm Arnold and all those things that started to really enter the literature. But for me, that quintet playing, it also related to like my small group jazz playing. It was very similar.
Right.
Because it was all based on listening.
Right.
You know, and matter of fact, when I teach improvisation, nobody's allowed to have any music. Because if they have music, they look at it.
Yeah.
They start using the visual instead of, and you mentioned that, Marty, and I think that is an ascent. I know, and I also watched every Empire rehearsal when I was at Tanglewood.
Yeah.
You know, I was helping teach there some, and
Right.
I'd come in on Saturday mornings and try to fix the damage that Ralph had done to people.
I know. I remember, and it was severe. Yeah, that was pretty bloody. It was like
it was awful. But anyway, you know, but I would watch the rehearsals and the music, it progressed at the rehearsals. That's what I really liked about the group, besides it sounding great, was that the rehearsals, Ralph would stop the group as usual, and he would go, okay, Scott, don't play that, play this.
right.
And, you know, and everything would start to morph into something that he and the rest of the group heard.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, you know, 2 weeks later, because they would learn the program for the next year, the main part of the program
Yeah.
would be at Tanglewood. And I never missed a rehearsal.
Right.
Because
And that was very interesting because and what you're describing is very unique because we only rehearsed then and we rehearsed in public. And it was like, and sometimes, as you recall, I mean, Rolf and Sam and people
Oh.
some badass things. And it was like,
say bad things. In
oh
rehearsal.
my God, you know, but it was real time. So,
Yeah.
uh,
But it was fantastic, and that interaction part is of course what everybody really enjoys the most.
Mm-hmm.
It's the move, you know. I think, you know, and when I heard the Canadians the first time with Ronnie and Fred, you know, they did play lightly, but with such an intensity,
right,
you know, and that made you know, it helped everything to really move and without the volume, because Ronnie is still I played with him about a year and a half ago or something like that. Unbelievable.
yeah,
He sounds fantastic, and he still has the same fantastic ease of production.
mm-hmm.
And you know, it's I think the lightness is an important part of quintet, and just what Marty's describing to me is, you know, I try to lay in the weeds. You know, most of the time when we do our program, I'm kind of laid back for most of the program. Then at the end, we do a couple of hard things, and I kind of let it loose.
Right.
You know, but aside from that, I mostly play, over half the time I play second trumpet, and I'm in the with the horn a lot, and I'm with, you know, trombone, and I'm trying to be in the middle and help the middle of the group sound full.
Yeah.
And I've always been a believer, see, that the horn and the trombone The tuba's always on the bottom. The two trumpets are always floating around on top.
Right.
But the real sound of the group is made by the horn and the trombone, because they're the meat of the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can have the best of everything, and if the middle is not there, the group always sounds like it's
Yeah,
all
yeah,
over the place.
yeah.
So the real heroes of the brass quintet, as far as the mechanical part of putting it together, besides the music, are the middle. You know, so that and then I know as a trumpet player, man, that makes me feel great.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't feel like I got to really jump on stuff, you know, and that it comes from you guys, and both of the groups had a tremendous, you know, core.
Yeah.
Always, no matter what volume it was, didn't matter what the volume was.
Yeah.
It mattered that energetic core was just so unified.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, it occurs to me that for a lot of brass players, if they don't necessarily have a really great background in jazz, that playing in a brass quintet, particularly an undergraduate brass quintet, could be the first time that you're playing jazz. You know, so many of those tunes, and I mean, particularly for horn players and
Absolutely.
tuba players who weren't necessarily in big bands in high school. And I wonder, Mr. P, and well, anybody, do you want to talk about how, because the St. Louis Brass Pops recordings are still some of my favorite recordings of all time. I mean, when I need my mood boosted, I'm going to put on the St. Louis Brass Delights album, Pops, all that stuff. It's just fantastic stuff. So when you're working with students that haven't necessarily played a whole lot of jazz before, and you're sitting down to do a Canadian brass a jazz chart, something like that, how do you help students sort of really start to get a feel for playing in that new idiom if all they've really played before is the Meistersinger and the Vaughan Williams concerto?
First of all, you have to do a lot of listening. And I think our influences come from listening to the great artists in jazz itself. You know, I mean, you go back and you listen to Louis Armstrong, et cetera, if you're going to play that style of music. And unfortunately, I don't think our young people have the advantage of doing that a lot of time, particularly in the tuba studio. And, you know, one of the things I did, I went to school and played piano, not that great, but I played a lot of gigs on piano, which frankly speaking, on the tuba, I still see the piano. I've always been a tuba player. I didn't play that well on piano, but it helped me to, you know, all the things that I never heard a symphony orchestra till I was 18, but I heard all the jazz things through my life because my dad was a jazz trombonist. And so that's all I can tell you. You know, I always had a pretty good feel for it. And I still, to my day, my listening goes to Bill Evans and to people like that. I'm still a devout listener. Now, when you're dealing with students, is what I try to do as a coach, I sing their parts to them a little bit, trying to get them to loosen up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you say the St. Louis Brass, well, I'm playing with good jazzers, Ray Sasaki and Alan Dean, and you know, those guys can swing. We never even talked about it, to be honest with you. You know, I would imagine the same way with you, Marty. You guys just sat down and played.
Yeah, they just.
Yeah, you know, it cost us a lot of money just to get there for one day of a rehearsal.
Yeah.
You know, and Alex, I had a really good arranger. If you know those Pops things, I had Joey Sellers.
Yep.
You know, and Joey was a student when I was at Arizona State. So I knew these guys pretty well, and I knew what I wanted, you know. So, like, out of that at Arizona State, we coached a Dixieland jazz band, and they went on to become the Side Street Strutters, you know. And they put that tape together, which they won in one night. We just put it together. That's all, because all these guys could play jazz. So, you know, we took some easy tunes. I hope that answers your question as far as I'm concerned.
No,
No,
absolutely.
I'll never forget hearing the St. Louis Brass in about 2005 in my hometown of Paris, Texas. It was one of the most fun concerts I've ever seen.
We always had a good time. We really did. And one of the reasons I loved it, it was a great hang. These people are my best friends, you know, and that's why we got together. And frankly speaking, it was very difficult to book because all of us had full-time jobs. And we had to sit down there and see who could get off at what time. You know, back in teaching in those days, you couldn't leave too much, a couple weeks a semester, and that was about it. You know, today it's a little more free, which I think is very good for professors, you know. However, those are the things. So Mel would have to book the group, And we'd sort of say, hey, we have these days available for 1 week, and try to put together a 10-day tour. And most of our tours were done because of grants. You know, the Mid-America Arts Alliance, of things like that, they supported us. He had a lot of those little things, so we didn't have to book at a real high fee, so we could go to some smaller places. And, you know, we were more like the brass quintet. We played at small halls. You know, once you got to have the big halls, that was a different thing. Marty, you can talk about that.
Yeah, no, it was a whole different thing in those days. I mean, when I joined the group, they told us, and I imagine it could still be true, they had never canceled a gig because of sickness, no matter what. I remember one time specifically, we were on tour and Chuck was sick. He had like 104 temperature, and we literally carried him from the hotel to the airport, two people on each arm, one person on each arm carrying him. And he was like, delirious. And so we had medicine and stuff, but we just like carry on, get on the plane, take him to the hotel. And the concert time comes, we go to the hotel, go to this concert. I remember very distinctly, he's literally like catatonic. He can't. We pick him up, we put his clothes on him, and right at 8 o'clock, we take the tuba out of the case and give it to him and stand him up and shove him on stage. And he walks on stage. He does all his classic Bach jokes and stuff, and he just like in the intermission, he walks off, collapses on the floor. But we just made it done. You didn't have a choice when there were those fees. Those people, they couldn't rebook. We were like a lot of those for the Canadians in particular, some with the Empire. A lot of those concert series that we were on, a lot of people booked the whole series because of us. Then all the other artists were there, and we were very proud to be that significant. So we couldn't cancel on them. And a lot of times you were dealing with, 20, 25, in those days, $25,000 a night was not chump change. It's still not chump change. No. But in those days, that was a lot of money. And it was a lot of money to Columbia because they got 10% of that. And they don't care. They didn't care where we were. If you were in Elko, Nevada one day and then the next night you had to be Carnegie Hall, sucks to be you. But it's money. So it was all about, so they didn't care. So, Yeah,
we had different audiences, smaller, a little bit more. So actually, and it was really kind of fun. We played I'm sure you did too, but we played some very remote areas, and some concerts we only had like 40 people in the audience sometimes, but we always had a good time, and that's one of the things I liked about the group.
Oh, the group was really great. It was really, really good, and that's the thing with the student groups now and stuff, and a lot of the young and up-and-coming groups, they're really good. Just because they're not really making a living and being able to do it yet, that doesn't take away from the quality of what they're doing. And the way we have the technology and the internet and people are posting stuff, it's like, damn, that group's good. That should be out there, And they're trying to get out there, competing with thousands of other musical stimulus. But it's tough because there's so much out there that. And then the fact that because it's sort of a double-edged sword, because we can access so much from sitting at our computers, Facebook and whatnot, I don't need to go to a concert live, so it's like, so then therefore, in order to get exposure, they put it up on Facebook.
Yeah.
Quick update, guys. I've been doing some behind-the-scenes Facebook Live settings adjusting. We've been live streaming now for about 20 minutes straight, so I think that's fixed now.
Good.
And we do have some comments. Some questions. We have a lot of comments. Mostly are just joking, but there are a couple of actual questions. I'm gonna get to some of those, but first, I want to give a formal welcome to John Foster down there, who tuned in to Australia,
Welcome.
and maybe get you involved in the conversation a little bit. First of all, we're all here in America. First of all, maybe a little Australian perspective, but also a lot of what you do is more early music with Australian Baroque Brass, with Queensland Baroque. Still a lot of chamber music, but a little bit different. So like just just share some of your experiences and how is this different from an early music perspective?
Okay, sure, that's no problem at all.
Can you talk Australian for us?
I can talk as Australian for you as you want.
All right.
Yep. It's very easy for me they go a little bit more ochre. We call it when we speak more Australian than Australian, when we're surrounded by other accents. But anyway, yeah, so my background, I mean, you know, obviously growing up originally in remote North Queensland, but then moving to a city and then doing the traditional kind of European conservatorium training or whatever. We started with a lot of traditional sort of chamber music. So some of my first chamber music experience were brass quintets playing the Evolds and Botzes and all the usual sorts of pieces. But then, of course, I went to England rather than America, and that came in the 90s. And you know, I got the pleasure of working with some of the guys that obviously played in the Philip Jones ensemble, and studied with some of them and played with some of them. And then so that was a very interesting thing, because before that I was only really familiar with a lot of the American sounding groups, obviously Canadian Brass and Empire Brass and the likes. And I'm hearing some overlaying themes that actually of some of these great groups, because I can remember specifically I got to come and sit in on the Academy of Saman's in the field, but there was a few of the guys from London Brass and things like that, like Roger Harvey and Michael Laird and a few other people that were originally playing in Philip Jones and that sort of stuff. And I just remember distinctly from playing in orchestras in Australia or whatever, these guys, the sense of chamber music they actually had in the brass section, and everything was very, very mezzo. There was none of this poco forte sort of playing, but that intense soft playing and uniformity and the matching and the feeling in the sections and the way these guys combined together, they really carried that over into their orchestral playing, which obviously is a slightly other topic. But you could hear that incredible experience that they'd all shared together coming through the 70s, 60s, 70s, and later in their careers or whatever, which really opened up my eyes to this different kind of, you know, sounding in a brass instrument, in a brass chamber ensemble. You know, the way that I obviously spent a lot of my time is with the earlier music, which is really diverse in a sense, because the combinations of instruments are changing constantly. So one day I'm playing cornetto with another cornetto and 4 sackbuts and strings. Another time I'm playing baroque trumpet with strings, or, you know, various sort of soloistic trio sonatas with accompaniment and things like that. So I'm having to blend with a whole different lexicon of sounds that we don't necessarily get to do on modern brass instruments, or that perhaps we could spend more time thinking about, particularly for the students. And I think it's of great advantage to have known where we've come from as the brass instrument family, and the sounds, the traditional sounds where these instruments came from, particularly because instruments have gotten so much bigger in the last 50 years. I think a lot of that's lost, unfortunately, particularly in the chamber music side of things. You're talking about, you know, small bore. Even if we go into the 19th century and the foundation of the brass quintet, if we look at, you know, late 19th century with Avold, you know, you hear that piece played a lot on, you know, obviously modern large bore trumpets, you know, double horn, large bore trombone and tuba, whereas actually it's written for cornets, tenor horn or sax horn, you know, small bore trombone and ophicleide or whatever, you know, or some kind of small tuba. And it's a vastly different sound and vastly different music. I mean, it doesn't mean to say that performed on modern instruments is not equally as valid, but
I think it's a really valid point you're making. The historic understanding, not just reading about it, but trying to get a perspective physically of the historical things. We sort of do it with horn players, with natural horn and stuff, but what you're talking about is a whole other league of depth of understanding. It's so hard to come by, and you know, it's tragic that we can't get more trumpet players to really experience a thing, and the trombones, the sackbuts, and the tubas, whatever ancient instrument, the stack, or what do you call it?
Ophicleide.
Ophicleide, yeah. So I mean,
which is an ophicleide, yes.
Yeah, but to give us a perspective, you know, it's tragic that we it's very difficult to pull that off now.
It is. It's hard to assemble the players. I mean, If you look at some of the, there's one group in particular, I'm thinking of Prince Regent's Brass in London with Annika Scott and some of her colleagues. They do a wonderful job. Yeah, they do a wonderful job of using all the original 19th century instruments, and they perform in the States quite often as well. And I really admire what they're doing at the moment. Even there's some really interesting early pieces that I've had the pleasure of performing and recording. There's original works by Cherubini, which are very early, sort of like from the 18 teens, and it's a brass quintet. It's for what's called a demi-lune trumpet or half moon-shaped trumpet, which is hand-stopped, 3 natural horns hand-stopped, and an ophiclide serpent or small-bore trombone as the bass instrument.
That's cool.
And it's an amazing sound because all the solo voices are hand-stopped, and that was originally those pieces originally written. And the music's published; everyone can get them. But originally written for Napoleon, because Cherubini was Napoleon's favorite composer and was my favorite.
I didn't know that.
So I mean, that's how far back. And actually, there's more French stuff from the mid 18th century that is really. And Ralph Dudgeon would be also another great resource for students or whatever to reach out to, because he knows all these pieces. Of course,
how could you? I'd love to find that Cherubini piece. How would I go about doing that?
I can. You can email me. I'll send you all the details. That's fine.
Okay.
I think it's brass. I think it might even be brass press. I'm not sure, but it's a set of about. I think. Well, I happened to. We've recorded them anyway, which is available. But I can certainly find the music and send it to you.
That'd be awesome. Problem. Just on Facebook, we can hook up through there. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's they're it's not profoundly art music or anything like that. Right. It's for an infantry band that used to entertain the troops and like that.
That'd be cool. It'd be cool. Yeah.
I want to add a thing to Alan Dean is our arranger, and he is a wonderful early music player, as you well know.
Oh, of course, Alan's fantastic.
And so Alan's done a lot of arrangements for us, the Praetorius. And one of the reasons I play F tuba, that the parts are pretty high. And so that's one of the things in the group, when I joined the group, is he wrote pretty high for us, and the F tuba seemed to be more advantageous for the group. So if you notice all those arrangements, we try to do as original as we possibly can with the instruments we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And of course, when we talk about those composers, of course, we're talking about two cornetos and 3 sack butts. Originally on the bottom, so that's why the tessitura would be quite high for the tuba. But I think it's particularly important for the students to listen to this stuff performed on the original instruments, just once again to give it that context and to understand the sort of, if you do use modern instruments, the kind of lightness, articulations, all these sort of aspects, which but I was completely, as a student, I was completely oblivious to all that. And now I really do spend a lot of my time, if I have to use modern instruments, trying to copy that style as closely as I can. And Marty, I think what you were saying before, like when you play that way a lot of the time, then you can play for a couple of hours and it's not so taxing.
Yeah.
When all your energy is going into the right dynamic and the real finesse of the detail and the right character.
And the thing is, it carries over into good orchestral playing. We all know when we hear really good orchestral playing, of course, they can melt the walls when they want to, but by and large, they have projection when they're playing soft. And that comes with a certain conscious effort to make it that way. So you're not just wasting energy and pouring a lot of fat energy. You have a concise amount of focused energy, and that produces resonance, and that projects. And it comes from that idea. And really good orchestral players do that. It's just that it's harder to come by because you don't have to do that. You can just sort of sit there and squander your energy. But when you hear a really good orchestral playing, we know some of the orchestras that we've listened to is like, they're not playing loud, but boy, they project. I can hear that sound. You know
right.
what I mean?
The thing that really gets me about chamber music sort of bleeding into our larger ensemble playing is just how the very best orchestral players listen and interact the way that chamber musicians do. I remember the first time I heard the Cleveland Orchestra from way up in the cheap seats, and I can't remember exactly what the piece was where this happened, but I remember looking down and there was a moment where the violins and the first trumpet had an entrance together, and I saw them and I felt them, the principal trumpet and the concertmaster, cue off each other and watch each other for that articulation, and it was just tremendous matching, and you can get lazy certainly in the orchestra from the fine, getting away from the quintet, fine-tuned, super listening stuff. But the very best ones, very best orchestral players, all play like chamber musicians.
I
100%.
was
The first time I ever saw the Vienna Philharmonic in the Musikverein in Austria, I mean, it was remarkable, the sense of chamber music. That I was listening to Mahler 9, and I may as well have been listening to, a Schubert octet. It was just remarkable.
Yeah.
Marty, I want to ask you again, is like you did a lot with particularly Empire, and I'm a big fan of Sam Palafian because, he could make you swing. And one of the problems, too, with student groups is a different thing to play in a quartet with a drummer. You have no drummer at all in a brass quintet.
Right.
Okay. Also, too, the arrangements, most of the composers write phonetically. They don't write, for example, like you'd read a jazz chart. They try to make it swing by putting it in compound time.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so there's a problem right there. Whereas, sometimes if you bring in a group and you're playing a Dixieland piece for a rehearsal, it's great to add a drummer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also you got to teach a tuba player to walk.
Right.
And if play 2-beat and 4-beat.
Right, and Sam, he was a master at it. When he walked, you could hear the drum behind him, even though there was no drum in the room.
That's exactly
You could just feel the afterbeat, the way he released the tone of his every note. It reflected a drum's substance. But that's hard to teach, man. And
well, he got that through listening.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. Yeah.
I mean, that's the way all of us. Hey, Vinny, talk about somebody who's had a great career in jazz. Vinny DiMartino. Where'd you learn? Where did you learn that?
Well, I spent an awful lot of time listening to people who could do it.
Yeah.
And I actually going to live concerts, because that's a really big part of any music. But when you're in the room and you're not listening to an electronic speaker, it's one thing if you've been to concerts like that. You modulate your knowledge of real room playing when you study music on recordings. But if you've never heard many live concerts, your whole concept of what music is a whole different perspective. So the interactive part, and talking about old instruments and things like that, John and I do this tour, we do call it the history of the trumpets, Sound the Trumpets, and it's kind of a light history of all, and both of us collect instruments. And when I started to play old instruments, I have about 150. When I started to play old instruments, boy, did I start getting some different ideas about the pieces. I said, well, this could have never been played the way I've been playing it for 10, 15, 20 years,
The forensics of actually getting the instruments in your hands just completely, you're forced to play idiomatically because, the instruments don't want to work any other way really well. So
and the composers heard the sound of those instruments. So the way they were putting the instruments together was based on the older instrument sound. The way they interacted in a room together. They didn't have any recordings to go by, So basically, I think nobody can really. I didn't really appreciate, what that was until I started doing it myself, and I said, "Boy, you were off, boy." The music was good that we played on these older pieces, but the actual sound, it was a different landscape, so to speak,
Yeah. Well, I hear recordings from myself playing piccolo trumpet 20 years ago, and I played Baroque trumpet then as well, but not to the same degree I do now, and then I just listened to something just yesterday that I did with Reinhold Friedrich, and the way the Baroque trumpets changed the way I approach the piccolo trumpet in the same literature is remarkable. It doesn't sound like the same person. So, and just what Vince was saying about the old instruments. If you look over my corner here, we've actually got a trumpet by Georg Ottensteiner from about 1850. It's a little natural trumpet, but it used to get played in Brahms's orchestra. The little trumpet in D, And if I pick it up, first time I got it, I played the ending of Brahms 2 with hand stopping. And the hand stopping is actually imperceivable to the listener. So suddenly it made sense to me because of the design of the instrument. You're not actually losing a great deal of sound. So you can totally understand how it would have sounded, you know, fine for these guys in the orchestra.
John?
And yeah.
As the horn player, I'm wondering about hand stopping a trumpet.
Yeah, I was just wondering the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so hand stopping a trumpet, it's funny, like it's not...
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. No, don't hand stop the trumpet player, just the instrument. If you get like a demo trumpet, for instance, which has got a slightly larger bell than, you know, maybe like a 6-inch bell as opposed to a 5-inch bell or something like that, then it is a little bit traditional the way you would have that. But this one behind me here, you literally, you kind of wave your hands, just flat hand, and just wave your hands back and forth, maybe like 2 inches out from the bell is enough to just temper the harmonic slightly, because that design of instrument, and it's interesting too, because when Vince said that's what the composers heard, because Brahms's father played trumpet to some degree, and all the other examples of that style of instrument in museums that you'll find in Europe, made by Bauer and various other people, they're all about 30 years earlier than this instrument. So this is from about 1850, something like that. And all the other ones are in the 18-teens or 1820s. So he would have grown up seeing his father probably play an instrument like this, or hearing it. And so when he went to commission the instruments for his orchestra, that's what he wanted. So, you know, but I would only have any idea about that had I not, you know, got the instrument and been able to try it for myself. So
I'd never heard of the trumpet using hand stopping. You never heard of that before.
It was only really done. So it was done in France, Germany a little bit, and in England actually, in the Drury Lane Theatre. The trumpet players played short model natural trumpets and hand stopped. And actually, some of the method books. Some of the method books on the front, I'm trying to think of a good example, will actually say, you know, method for cornet à piston, cornopian, English slide trumpet, hand stop trumpet. It'll list all the different instruments that one player was expected to play. So it was quite, you had to be quite the multi-instrumentalist, you know, in the middle of the 19th century.
You know, I want to change the subject a little bit, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
I want to bring up, you know, what the chamber music has brought, particularly brass quintets. You realize that's how people like me got our jobs. Because back when the New York Brass Quintet was playing, they got a movement where universities, instead of hiring a trombone player to teach tuba, they wanted a tuba player to play in a brass quintet. The reason being is they could recruit. They didn't have to bring a band or an orchestra, so it was a different genre. And that, obviously, if you take a look back 50 years later, look how many jobs are out there now because of the brass quintet movement.
Yeah,
and obviously groups like Canadian, who started out as, you know, young audiences. We played young audiences back in the New York Quintet and and they turned it into a, you know, educate the people out there, you know, I mean, the big thing. So anyway, I just want to bring up that point. I would imagine without that movement, you probably wouldn't have had the jobs in the universities you have today, which outnumber all the orchestra players.
That's absolutely true.
When you think about it.
You know, Mr. P, you know very well that I've had several different college jobs, and each one involves a faculty quintet. It's part of the hiring process, and it's a really important part of our recruiting and the functionality of it, playing at ceremonies. You know, the president of the University of Tennessee has heard myself and Alex Van Duuren play a number of times in some public places, and it's a really important part of the landscape.
You know, and I'm surprised on most of these main universities where they stress the orchestra, by the way, which I adore. Don't get me wrong. But if you want to get a job in a college, other than a ding doctorate degree, what they get, you don't even look at it, you better be able to play in a brass quintet. And part of your audition is going to be on that. So therefore, it's really important to have a good, strong chamber music program. I was very disappointed when I came to Indiana that there wasn't a real strong small ensemble program. And one of the things that developed into hiring a DeMondre Thurman was the fact that we needed somebody to do the small ensemble. We also needed a euphonium teacher. But if you take that in mind, all of us who are teaching college, we can open up a lot of doors. And as a result of it, the students are going to benefit. So the importance, what we're talking about, of playing, hey, Baroque music, you have to go back and you have to study. You have to listen. Jazz, that's hard. Most of the groups that I hear can't swing forever. I mean, the worst thing I hear is mostly in some very good brass quintets, I hate to say it, they don't swing. And the result is, I think it's also a nature of our programs and the way some of the music is written. There's good arrangements, bad arrangements, but if you can play some Dixieland, go back and listen to Kid Ory and some other people.
Well, that's one of the
I just wanted to add that. It's very important that we, and I'm so proud of the fact that what the quintet thing has evolved over the years.
But I like that we're coming back over and over again to the concept of listening, deep listening, and because we're getting some comments on the Facebook page asking for some tips. And one thing that's been coming up a lot in a lot of different settings is what the heck are we going to do with this time? We now have this indeterminate period of time where our daily lives are just functioning differently, and especially thinking about the students. I think about students all the time with this weirdness going on. What can they do with this? How can we possibly turn this into something that in some way could be positive? Well, now's the time. Now's the time to dig in and actually learn. And when you listen to something, don't just know that you've listened to the piece, but be able to tell the difference between two different recordings of Data Hood.
Yeah, I think it's important to listen, but we need to give some guidance to them, like with your understanding and Vinny and the experience. The difference between this jazz player and this jazz player, this group, this genre, this period, this composer, to actually assign that kind of direction. Say, I want you to listen to next week this person and this person, and I want you to tell me 4 things that are different about those, the way they played and or composed. Give them some guidance to. Otherwise, they just listen to it aimlessly. They don't know. And for somebody like myself, I don't know that much, so I sort of ad lib it, so to speak. But Vinny, what did you say?
I agree 100%. I always practicing too, especially now when we're sequestered in our homes or somewhere. I tell people, and I've told them this forever, is that you should never practice any more hours than you listen, because there's a lot of cement head trumpet players and other instruments too, that they play the trumpet really well, or they play and they can nail some different kind of tune or something, excerpt or something like that, but they're not part of any particular landscape, which we have to be actors and actresses. Mm-hmm. We have to be able to fit in with whatever group. I play with a different piano player when I'm playing concerts every week. I can't tell a piano player, well, I don't really like when you play sharp 11s on every chord. I don't give instructions. I just play. So basically, I think it's really important that you have a background that's very broad, and the listening part of it. A lot of, even some of my classical friends that are, they think they're strictly classical. They say, well, I can't play jazz. I say, no, that's just not true. I say, you have to spend an inordinate amount of time doing anything to do it really well. It's not a matter of just sitting down and trying to play in a quintet like Dan was talking about. He says he knows all these players because he's listened to all of them, and we've all done that, I think. And I didn't know any better because I never had any lessons until I went to college. So man, I put on a record and I wore it out until
Vinny,
yeah,
and that's the thing for students these days, and it's so important what you're saying, because how blessed are they that they've got the world at their fingertips, at their computer. Like I can remember, and you'd be the same. Yeah. You'd get an LP, you go to the library, you have to listen to it, and then they can listen to anything they want. So it's kind of like I can't imagine how wonderful that must be. Well, in your most formative years, to just have access to everything. It's wonderful.
But the discipline of the seeking of information too, there's something to that. That's what I think I enjoyed. I went straight from when I collected on my newspaper route. I knew exactly how much I had to pay for my my newspapers for the week that I delivered, and I'd take the rest of the money, and I didn't even go home first. I went directly to the department store, to the record department, and I saw if there were any new Rafael Mendez records or Maynard Ferguson records or, or Don Jacoby records or this or that. I mean, I was like, I was a maniac.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of, we have to have some sort of fanaticism about us, about our learning experience that drives us to doing that, whether it's some role model that we've had. Like, I mean, I met Clark Terry when I was in high school, and once I heard him, I mean, then my life was changed. Louis Armstrong was the very first trumpet player that I met. I was 12 years old. I mean, when you meet somebody like that and you hear them, it has an effect on you. So that's where I go back to the live concerts, listening to recordings, modeling.
The other thing is too, Vinny, I think that there's so much out there that without some guidance from ourselves and our experience, kids, they don't even start because they don't know where to start.
I have lists. When I go to a master class, I have a two-sided thing. And on the first part is some fundamentals. It's more of an outline too for me. Make sure I cover certain things. But then on the other side is just a list. And it's by no means complete, but it has like the Canadian, the Empire.
Hey, Vinny.
Different orchestras.
You froze
jazz
there.
bands. It's got everything.
As a tuba player, I had the pleasure of working with a group called the Tuba Jazz Consort with Rich Madison. And it's surprising how many students don't even realize the name Rich Madison. And I keep having to, hey, listen to this, listen to Tuba Jazz Consort. What we did. We used to have a rhythm section of Hank Jones, Louis Bellson, and you name it, Rufus Reed, and all these guys would sit in. We never had a rehearsal.
Bebop Minor.
There you go.
Remember that too?
Yeah, I do.
With Rich, I played it with Rich at a concert. We were both guest soloists.
Yeah, I got a chart on that.
And it was like we played together our whole lives. I'll never ever forget that day.
Yeah,
because
I used to go out with Rich. I never heard Rich miss a note.
No, that's true.
Never. I mean, he'd do a 3-hour concert. He was strong. I've never heard anything. He'd pick up a tuba, sound just like he did on the euphonium, but he could play anything. Pick up a trumpet. Yeah.
I know.
But, that was for me a real strong education because you had to learn it. I remember going on a stand and they had Oleo down there. And I looked around and I said, oh my God, we got to play this. And I said, Buddy Baker, what do I do? He says, Dan, sing it. I went, he said, play it the same way. And the articulation was just like I sang it. I couldn't do it like an Arban, But that's because of the listening of the stuff that we did before that. Yeah. Anyway, that was really an experience for me because before that, Vinny, you talk about ad-libbing. You say, I play with a different pianist every night. Yeah, the piano was playing changes. In the brass quintet, the only guy sometimes playing changes, there's not many on there, maybe the bass line.
Hey, can we talk a little bit more about in the in-deep guided listening thing? This is again, just thinking about our audience, thinking about some of the kids that are out there and what they want to. So Marty, you were talking about, helping people listen. You could pick whatever example of whatever piece, find 2 different recordings of them. How would you start guiding a student through deep listening?
Well, it depends. If you're talking about orchestral stuff or you're talking about solo stuff, it's a question of balancing it out. Give them a starting point. You can go to like the Horn International Horn Society. They have Chicago, Cleveland, a couple of different orchestras to start with, and we use those a lot. But I think it's important to. For me, when I let's say orchestrally, okay, here's a new piece. I don't want to just learn the excerpt. You need to know the piece. I give them some guidelines and say, listen to this orchestra, play it, and listen to the difference between this orchestra, like a Vienna or Chicago, and those kind of variations, like 3 different, and listen, and I want you to come back and tell me what you hear. What is the difference to you? Besides tempo. And then you have to say, I want you to be able to differentiate the recording technique. And then and then of course we don't have very rarely do we have live concert sort of exposure in the local orchestras. You can, but I mean, so I usually try to give them a structure, and I'll say once you listen to this, if you get hooked on this piece or hooked on this composer, like for instance, I available all my students all of Sibelius symphonies. And most students are like going, Sibelius, what the fuck is that? So, but if you listen to it, it's a totally cool thing. And most of them really love it because it's so unique. It's not like anything else. So I try to, but generally speaking, for the listening, I give them a specific topic. And if it's jazz, I'm more limited. I don't know. I mean, I don't have that much experience, which is tragic for horn players. But, I mean, I learned anyway empirically just picking it up on my own just because I just listened to a lot of music. As a kid, you see, I didn't start as a brass player. I actually I just sang to myself since I was about 5, every night, just making shit up. And so when I took up the horn, it was a voice. It was simply a voice to me. So I picked it up because my father listened to a lot of jazz in the day, in the 40s and 50s. He had a huge record collection. So I listened to that stuff and didn't even know that it was embedding itself in me. So I kind of learned how to swing because of that.
But that was pop music back then, right?
Exactly. That was the pop music. Yeah,
Not
totally.
today. Different. Yeah.
Yeah. And see, and that even compounds it even worse because now you've got contemporary music today, and what the heck is that? And how does it compete and compare? And how does it blend? Sometimes it does. Most of the time it doesn't. It's like there's so much for these kids to hear and absorb. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, I gotta say, this is tricky times and whatnot. I'm sure we're all doing things for ourselves to sort of pick ourselves up and feel, better about things. For me, an album that I keep going back to over again is Frank Sinatra Live at the Sands with the Count Basie Orchestra, and all arrangements by Quincy Jones. And just every nanosecond of that recording has 20 things that you could learn, about voice pairing, time, intonation, phrasing, playfulness. I mean, there are certain recordings that just completely knock you out with just how overwhelmingly amazing an experience it is to listen to. A lot of Empire Brass recordings like that for me. Mr. P, your album with Gail Williams is I feel like I learn so much every time I go back and listen to that duet album. So for you guys, what are some recordings that just really knock you out that you think that young people should be really starting to cut their teeth on as far as listening and learning?
Oh boy, what genre? Depends what you're asking here. I go back. I listen to let's see, Charlie Parker, Bill Evans. I'm a Bill Evans freak. I had a chance of doing a workshop back in the 70s, and he was there. Hi there, how are you? Good to see you. Anyway, I mean, it's a different story. One of the things too is that it helped me out a lot, and I don't do jazz every day like Winnie does, and so if I have to play a jazz thing, it's hard. Go back. But I have a thing called Band in the Box. Yeah. I have all the Abasol charts and records that I can play along with. In other words, it's a rhythm section, music -1 again, like it used to be in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And I would say, hey, for these young players, if you're learning, you want to learn a little bit about the jazz stuff, put this on, listening to who did some of these good charts, trumpet players. I mean, there's so many of them are so good. You let Clark Terry. I had a chance to, he told some good jokes, I'll tell you. The one thing I enjoyed about Clark, but boy, what a player, And there's just so many that you do. Now, on the classical side, the orchestra guide, what I find is the greatest gift right now to me, for my students, is this orchestraexcerpts.com. You go on there, and it's a tuba, and they have all these major symphonies, and they pulled out just the parts that you're going to audition on. And they have 3 different orchestras playing them and 3 different tuba players. And boy, that's, I collected all the tuba excerpts, the orchestra charts over the years. I have a collection of all of them just about, but this one saves me a lot of time. That's a good place to start.
What was the name of it again?
It's called orchestraexcerpts.com.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And you go on there, there's for the horn, And the tuba is especially
Trumpet.
good. You know,
There's a trumpet
and the
in
horn
there.
is different. You got sections: first horn, second horn, such and such.
Right.
But for me, it's really easy. And those are a lot of things that saved me a lot of time in my teaching. Go listen to this, then come back and play it for me. And how would they do, for example, in Europe? How are they going to do Bruckner versus what they're going to do in America? If you want a job in Europe, what's the difference? Well, hell, most of the times in Europe, they use an F tuba on a lot of that stuff. That's different, you know,
It's ama-
because, you know,
Sorry, go ahead.
Brahms is it just is, you know, not a contrabass tuba, for example. Anyway, that's a pretty good way to start. And is also in the quintet music, you know, I just try to say, hey, go back and listen to Miles Davis play this chart, etc. Vinny, you can talk more about that than I can. Or, you know, Dave Baker had a
Thank you.
studio right
Thank you,
next
sir.
to me. I listened to him for about 10 years. It was amazing, you know.
You know, guys, just interested to get your perspective on this. But see, from where I come from, I don't make any specific difference between jazz and the classical world, because to my way of thinking, I mean, if I listen to Bach and I listen to Charlie Parker, there's so much alike in so many ways
Yes.
that to me, jazz is just another genre of classical music. To say that it's any, you know, delineated, I mean, I know that it's its own world, but I think, you know, particularly for the greater public and for the concert platform and all those sort of things, I think it's an interesting subject to you know where its place is, because I know obviously being that it's from your country and you've got that great tradition, it's so important to the fabric of the music that comes out of the US. But obviously, so somewhere isolated like Australia, it's you know it's there or thereabouts, but not as fundamentally as important.
I'm talking
but,
mostly as a teacher, though. You know, I mean, talking about
Yeah.
this, what I do in my own time is a completely different story. You know, I'll go out and listen to Chet Baker or try to play Chet Baker songs and things of that nature, which usually tuba players just don't do. But that was my training.
Yeah, okay, but you know, that's to me that's totally valid.
But the university is you know, hey, we're teaching people. It's not going to do any good unless they get jobs. And so we're always trying to also help them get jobs.
Yeah.
For example, if you're going to do pop music of today, look what they're doing with a little sousaphone with some of those nice pop charts.
Yeah.
Country music, you know, why don't you go into that genre and show different things? I see it happening. It's exciting. Rock and roll. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do with our instruments that, you know,
One of
just
the
don't be
things-
tied down to what we do. Yeah, buddy.
One of the things that's really important is that when they hire us as musicians, of course, but they hire us as specific instrument teachers.
Yeah.
And I really believe that we need to teach the instrument, because we can't predict what like 20 years from now. And we have to give students have to get the tools to be able to cope with whatever music is going to be in an orchestra, in a brass quintet, in a pop scene, recording studios. So I want to make sure that myself as a teacher, besides all the different environments that they play in, that they have the skills to play the instrument when somebody puts something on the stand. And, you know, like, I spent a lot of time recording music back, you know, a while back. And I used to like the challenge of when somebody put something in my stand. I liked it. I liked to be able to just hit it, you know what I mean? And go play with Cincinnati Pops, and they put some impossible thing there, you know? And I say, well, no, it's not impossible. I should be able to play this within 15 minutes. And then I figure out what's going on, and then the red light goes on, you know? I mean, I think that's, so I think that students, you know, today, that's one of the things about competitions that's really bad.
And every young trumpet player out there should check out those recordings of the Cincinnati Pops. And is it Eric Kunzel?
Anyway, but the thing is, they learn 8 solos in 8 semesters, or they learn 1 semester a year for the national trumpet competition, one tune, you know, and then they can't transpose. They really don't have any other skills. They might be able to play a few etudes, but I'll tell you right now, when I played with Marty Hackleman, there wasn't anything. When we played with the Washington Symphonic Brass, I was distracted almost the whole time because no matter what he played, it was like a magnet for me. I was going, man, whoa, that's the way that should go, man. That's it. That is the way. You see, because he could make the horn do what was necessary for that environment, for that character. When we did the Queen things, man, that was one of the great experiences of my life. I wasn't even playing. I was sort of conducting. They tried to give me something to do that I could do it. So I was just, sort of waving around, but I stopped some of the time because he was playing, because he had grasped the environment so well. He was in the play, and his character was dominant in a lot of the way the music was written and everything too. Of course, it was dominant because it required that, and that's what we need to be teaching.
Right.
How to listen in an ensemble. I mean, sometimes I play really softly. If I can't hear the violin solo and I'm playing in an orchestra, well, hell, I'm too loud. And I'm going to figure out a way to play softer the next time I do it, because that was just not soft enough. And I think that's the thing, when students say to me, oh, but it says forte, I said, what does that mean? I said, that has absolutely no value to me. I said, what?
The trumpet player, there's a violin solo there? What?
Well, yeah.
And Vinny and Marty, another thing that we brought up is you got to know the business end of our business too if you're going to survive. You could be the greatest horn trumpet player in the world, but if you don't understand the outside world, what's going to happen? I mean, like, I remember the Summit Brass. That was an idea of Dave Hickman. We were in the back of a car with the St. Louis Brass Quintet. We heard, I think, from a group from Sweden. And Dave says, why the hell don't we do that? I said, well, that's a good idea. He said, well, I know some people here. Let's see if we can get some financial backing. Yeah. Okay? Pretty soon, we got a little bit of the backing, and he knew people in Colorado. He put a group together. Who do you want? And hell, I says, well, hey, these are the names I particularly want, and let's get Picorni and me and Ralph Sauer and Gail Whale and such. All of a sudden, the group was formed, and we had a record contract before we played the first note. And you needed a guy like Hickman who, he's tireless. He's like a Harvey Phillips of the trumpet. He gets an idea, man, he runs with it. But I mean, all that is still possible if you want to think outside the box. Now, you got to play your horn, and you have to play it extremely well. But now, what about the next step? If there's not a job out there, what's going to happen? You audition for the orchestras, nothing's there. I came up, there was no openings. Everybody was, I went to the military. All right, nothing. And so I got lucky with Harvey Phillips. I got a job playing in a college, playing the brass quintet. I'm just saying that things can really, you can do a lot on your own. I see this Facebook stuff that a lot are doing. And I warn the students, please put some good stuff out there. If it's not good, don't do it.
Don't put it up, yeah.
Please, because you're just ruining your reputation. Anyway, I just wanted to bring up that point.
I have to say, too, I love the Paving the Way album so much. It's just so cool.
Did you see the original?
Yes.
Okay, we're not going there. Yeah, all right. Yeah.
Love that album.
It's really tricky to, like you say, there is so many possibilities and avenues to try to go out and promote yourself, to do something, and to help give them some guidance. And it's tricky because the good news is there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of avenues. The bad news is there's a lot of stuff out there and there's a lot of avenues, but you don't know what's going to be effective. And you're right. You got to tell the kids, tell the people, you have to be true to your instrument first. You have to have a personality. So when they hear your instrument, whether it's in a group or a solo or an ensemble, they say, that means something. That person is significant. He's not just hitting notes. He's not making sound. And therefore, I want to know what he's going to say. And then you put that in a group. And then you have something. But you can't. But we know students, so many times you got to talk to them. It's like, you didn't miss a note, but you didn't make any music.
Yeah, and Marty, another thing too is this interesting question. Sometimes I'll ask students who are sophomores and juniors in college, tell me what a blues is. And you could be surprised. You've been listening to it all your life, and you don't know what a blues. Well, they didn't teach me that in theory class, So you got to have enough creativity outside to look outside the box.
Yeah.
Where did Sam Palafian learn that? Did a lot of listening outside the box, a creative person.
One thing I'd like to, it goes in line with that and goes back to a question we were asked too. And I have to say, being the horn player in Quintasonic Brass is just so inspiring because, you've got Jason Dovel switching roles amazingly on Baroque and modern trumpet, and Alex Van Duuren and obviously Vince, just the jazz improv abilities that they display. So like Alex, how would you encourage someone to learn to improvise like you do?
Oh, the number one thing I always tell my students is that it's not as magical as they think that it is, and to not be scared. That improv is approachable and is, I believe, literally possible for everybody. And I think that students, especially just improv in general, we've already covered a lot of the listening things that are important with jazz. But approaching improv, it's basically starting with scales and arpeggios, and then understanding that it's not always just true creative genius that's happening in any moment. 80% of a solo is understanding the scale and the arpeggio and the material that you're playing, and then being creative with it. And I really believe that anybody can improvise in jazz. And so my goal with students is always to just get them to understand that it's much more approachable than they think it is to just start. We use maybe the tune So What, which is just AABA with two different chords, D minor and E flat minor, and okay, here's two Dorian scales. You already know them because they're the second mode of all the major scales that you know. All you're going to do is that for 32 bars, and all of a sudden this sort of light bulb goes off. Okay, I can do that scale for 8 bars for sure. Okay, is that really all I need to do was play that scale for a little while? Basically that's what you needed to do. And I love seeing that reaction because it's like a door opens.
Do you write out your solo sometime?
I have before, and I have my students specifically do that a lot. In fact, I have a student this week who's writing out a chorus of Just Friends, where I just gave him the scale material and said, just go ahead and write out your solo and play that. You don't even need to worry about making it up necessarily.
Because a lot of brass quintets, you're going to play the same music. Some of our really great brass quintets, there's a trombone solo that I've heard the same for the last 40 years, but it's damn good.
Right.
That's a different genre too.
And there's nothing wrong with that. You can.
And particularly, we're talking, you guys are a little bit more specialized in jazz than a lot of us, as far as having played gigs and the like, If I have to do something, man, I write out some of my solos. I told David Baker, I said, I wrote it out. He says, great, I do too. But I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
For teaching improvisation, I don't give them any music. No music. I try to get them to, first of all, not play very many notes, but just to become part of the environment and learn about the other instruments. Because there's so many aspects that have to do with ensemble playing that are just like playing in an orchestra or a brass quintet or anything. Like if the bass is playing a certain way, well, the ends of the notes are a certain way, and if you play and it doesn't match with the way the piano's comping and all of that, if it's in a more traditional sense, and of course there's more than that going on in a lot of groups, but in a more traditional sense, you have to learn to hear. That once again, that hearing part, like Marty was talking about singing. My wife, she must really get tired of me in the mornings because I'm like going and talk about people singing in the shower. I'm in the bathroom and I'm thinking about this and that sound and that, and I'm making, and I'm articulating because I'm thinking about some instrument I heard or some voice or some sound. I'm always practicing, and I'm playing rhythms on the steering wheel and, in the car. And I'm just, but I think that's the part that most people expect to go to a teacher and be taught. And I just
Yeah.
don't think
And
lessons. I just don't think that's what lessons are at all.
no, and I try to go back to that too and use that because I tell my students and my people that I work with is, look, nobody wants to hear the horn. What they want to do is hear a singer with the voice of the horn. Therefore, we all, even the most dim-witted young students, if you have them, you have this little thing to play, I want you to just sing that. And they'll sing it in a very musical way, 9 out of 10. They might do it timidly, but they'll sing it. And now, listen to the way you shape that note. Listen, you articulated that note, and you sort of inferred that this was an arrival point, this was a passing. And you did that instinctually. So your job is to bring the horn up to the level of the music and not the music down to the level of the horn. You just got to listen to the little Pavarotti that's in your fucking head.
So imitation is the best teacher. I mean, that's what it goes down to.
It's there. It's there.
It's there. That's, yeah.
The audience doesn't have to go to a lecture for 2 hours before the concert to appreciate the music.
No.
There's only, thank God for me that there's only 3 things that happen in music. It gets more excited, less excited, or it stays the same. And then audiences understand that because it mirrors the things that happens in their lives every day. The tension and release of situations and the music itself. Otherwise, people wouldn't understand music. It would just be a bunch of chords. That's why some people always go, well, it was too dissonant for me. Well, because they're not listening to the right thing.
Right. Well, they're not. I mean, and to me, I always tell the students. To me, it's like, and for all of us, I'm absolutely sure when we hear a piece of music, we instinctually, without even thinking, feel a story. We feel a personality. We feel a voice. We hear words. We don't even. It could be a language we don't know. It can be colors. It can be temperature. It's instinctual. It sets off all of these things. And so, as a teacher that comes in and the person wants to learn to play the French horn, I said, okay, why? The purpose is I want you to become adept at playing this instrument, to feel these things, to express these things, to hear these things, to imagine these things, make them up. Just because you can go do without missing a note, that's only the start. So it's really important. And some of the young kids, they come in because they're really keen. They're instrumentalists. And frustrating thing is too, I think, is some of it, especially because with wind instruments, brass instruments, it's so different than the poor strings. Matt knows the story. So, as a brass player, you want to be so you're in a little school, high school or younger, and you want to play in the band. And someone says, okay, you can play in the band. Here's your instrument, Johnny. Don't stick out. Just don't miss a note. Just sit there and blend in, okay? Yes, sir. Now, the string player, on the other hand, I want to be a violinist. Here's your violin, the most supreme instrument in the world, the most beautiful concertos in the world, the most soloistic. And if you really want to branch out, you could be in a string quartet, which is a fantastic element. So little Joan gets the violin, and she goes, "Oh, this is awesome!" So she starts playing all her Bach and and Brahms and all this kind of stuff. And she goes to audition for the little orchestra and says, "You sound really good, Joan. I want you to go sit over there with the other 15 people that are playing your fucking notes and don't stick out." So the mentality gets totally crossed, and the better we get on our brass instruments, they say, "Hey, you sitting in the herd over there, you sound pretty good. Come play a note by yourself." And so it's so frustrating for the students. So the brass players, they come in and like, I've been a good, responsible bandsman. I'm not sticking out, And so now our job is to say, no, we want you to stick out in a good way. We want you to stand out, not stick out, but stand out. So it's really, I always found it the way the trajectory of the string instruments and the wind instruments, and of course you see it in orchestras all the time. You see all these poor string players, and they're very good musicians and good people, but they totally resent playing the same note with 15 other people.
That rings so true for me, Marty. As a kid, I had to play violin for a couple of years. And then one day you're there and you're scratching away with all the other kids. Someone gave me a trumpet and I just thought, well, oh my God, I've been missing out,
Yeah.
And rest history. So that's a good story.
It's
we
funny.
have a question from Neil Grindstaff, and they say, how do you think individual personality fits into an orchestra or band setting?
I think personally, for me, I've done both. It depends on what position you're in, what instrument you're playing. If you're one of 15 violins, doesn't count for much. You got to just blend in. Okay. If you're solo horn, solo trumpet, tuba, you have to know, okay, I am now in a lead dog position, or now I'm not. So it really depends. You have to be, the personality has to develop an intelligence to relevance of what you're doing in the realm that you're in. If you're doing chamber music, if you're doing a jazz group, if you're doing a brass quintet, if you're doing a solo recital, whatever, it makes all those things are different. So your personality has to have intelligence, and that's what that I feel as a teacher we need to like give everybody like, okay, what are you supposed to do now? Are you a leader or are you a follower? So it's really important that the perspective, the personality must breed intelligence.
Yeah, I would say one of the most instructive experiences I ever had was when I was a student at Tanglewood, and I was attending a rehearsal. The Boston Symphony was playing the Meistersinger Overture, and I think I can say this now because he's well tenured. But Mike Roylance wasn't there for the downbeat of the rehearsal. He was just like 30 seconds late, and so they started the overture without him, and it was the Boston Symphony playing Faulkner. It was incredible, but then they started over once he was ready to go, and I heard one person clarify pitch, time, articulation, attitude for 109 other people, and in the sense that we all play a lot of accompanimental roles, there's still so much personality that you can bring, and it's not just what you bring, it's what you listen for, or is the principal tuba matching the principal trumpet? I mean, how well did Arnold Jacobs match Bud Herseth? And that, I think, is where a lot of personality and attitude comes into large ensemble play.
A related question by Reynolds Martin, who's a trumpet player at the Cincinnati Conservatory. He asks, how do you come up with a unified ensemble sound? You want to jump on that one?
Well, that kind of reminds me, going back to what John was saying about growing up in London, I kind of feel like there's a tradition that kind of is getting lost a bit in this individual personality of orchestras. And I love to listen to 1990s London Symphony, with the trumpets, B-flat trumpets. And to me, I listen to Pittsburgh Symphony Live, and the leaders of the brass section have really created a culture there of a certain kind of color of sound, articulation, dynamic spectrum. Everybody talks about the Pittsburgh louds, but the Pittsburgh softs are so amazing too. And that ability to really shape an orchestral culture, whether it's Chicago or a lot of times now we're kind of going towards more of a unit or kind of losing the distinctions, and I kind of like the different cultures that are out there or have been out there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what makes music interesting is having all these different flavors and being able to show the difference, in the styles. I mean, if I listen to a Tchaikovsky symphony, I want to know that if I hear the Leningrad Philharmonic from the late 60s, it's going to be, raw and scintillating and incredibly bright in the trumpets, but over the top, compared to, say, if I listen to, a group from Munich or, wherever.
I think I think that's totally relevant. I think for the young student, the younger person that might be asking the question is like, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I start? I think the most important thing for them to do is, in the milieu and the environment that you're in, listen to what is good in your ensemble. Feed off that. Add to that. Be the sound that you want to play with. And how can I make, now that I understand these 2 or 3 or 4 people that I really can glom onto technically and sound and musically, how can we become an entity that is 4 people as one? You know what I mean? And it changes all the time. So I think it's a question of like not waiting to be for a young person to come into an ensemble like, how do I create a sound? You want to be part of the inspiration. You don't want to be inspired necessarily. You want to inspire, and at the same time you want to be inspired by colleagues, and then bring these things out technically and musically, and then it creates a sound, it creates a personality. Like with the Chicago and Cleveland and Pittsburgh. They created sounds somewhat from personalities, but also acoustically they did. So, but for a young person, like, how do I start this? Like, okay, be something that someone wants to listen to. Be something that someone wants to sit next to and add to. And then you reciprocate the same way. Like, I can make you sound better too. And so, and that's infectious. We know, we've been in ensembles, big ensembles, small ensembles that do this. And when it happens, it's like, this is so much fun to be here. Instead of like, I'm hitting my notes and like, I don't know, was a break yet? You know. So if you come out with a mentality of like, what can I bring to this? How can I make this special? And don't wait for Mahler and Bruckner. The most mundane thing, make it good, make it special, make it interesting.
Make the other person sound good.
Sorry, Vince, go ahead.
A quick word is that in brass players, especially, I don't know, I'm not going to talk about horn players are busy most of the time. All right, they're always listening. Trumpet players, on the other hand, they never play well because a lot of time, not never, but there's a lot of trumpet players who don't seem to be a part of the piece for the whole piece. So how can you possibly learn what your role is if you only understand?
You don't have much of a role. Yeah.
You can't play the piece, you know. And I'm mystified sometimes when I'm playing in groups because I'm going, why did that person do that? 6 people just played the same thing, and they're going somewhere else. I don't understand that. Now what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
You know, you just wonder, and I think that's once again environmental. Everything you need to know about a piece is contained in that piece in a special vernacular language that this composer has set forth in sound. Mm-hmm. And my job is to learn that, and then to make sure I stay within the character, and yet still, be the emotional person that I am. Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's all I can say about it. I'm kind of simple about the whole thing, I
was just going to say, Vince, on a practical level for young quintet players and things like that, I'd find some really simple arrangements or something like Bach chorales or hymn tunes and things like that. Something that's really simple, but you have to develop obviously breathing together and a sonority of sound and a type of phrasing together. Just do it on that basic sort of level. So you're just hearing very simple harmony, very simple. And, a lot of the time people want to, of course, run before they can walk. And as a group, I think to form that foundation, just start with something very cellular and simple and at least take it from there.
Mm-hmm. There's another thing, too, on seating. First of all, we're talking about brass quintet, and brass quintets are also trumpet heavy and tuba heavy.
Yeah.
And I particularly do not like to see 2 trumpet players playing in each other's face. Where else does that happen? I mean, you always play beside each other. You can hear better, And then, of course, you got to have the horn. So it's a lot of times, for example, if you're going to play early music, you want to be, I still don't like 2 trumpet players playing in each other's face. As a listener, it bothers me because I don't hear the whole ensemble. What do you think of that, Vinny? I'm curious.
Well, I do both things. Like we sit, because mainly it's for me, I always have to sit in the same place because I'm deaf in one ear. So I'm always, when you see a quintet, you'll always see me sitting in the same place. But at the same time, I have my own way of making sure that my part comes out without playing too loud. And the tuba leans forward a lot of times, I noticed, and that's really helpful because they go straight out. And I like the horn sitting next to me so I can get out of the way of the horn and they can be heard when they want to be heard.
Especially when it's Matt Haislip.
Yeah, and after that, when Matt sits next to me, then I play in tune. So I really like that because he's always in tune.
Oh, I don't know about that.
But if you're playing show music, I can see, where everybody stands in a straight line. And Marty, you guys did that a lot with Empire in particular.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe you weren't here kind of when I talked about that early on when I first got on the seating we did, because that was ideal, because visually to the audience it was very strong and very positive, and you could see the faces and you see the whole personalities, not a bent over figure. And Sam would sit on the right side as you're looking at the audience. His bell could go out. He could open up. He could be clear. He could play soft but still be heard. Then you had the trombone and two trumpets basically facing right out. If they wanted the direct color and the blend, they could sit next to one another and go right down. If you wanted to bring the heat, it didn't get any hotter. If you wanted to play soft, they played it in the stand. And the horn, for me, I was able to like open and close the bell to the audience so that we had total acoustic control of things. I don't understand why the quintets sit in that horseshoe and play into one another. I just, no one will convince me that that's good.
Would you play the Antler quintet the same way?
Yeah, why not?
I mean, it's hard to hear each other. That's all I'm saying.
For us, if we're playing really difficult pieces, sometimes we would just stand closer together. You can stand closer than you can sit together. And so we could hear each other. Also, as I mentioned earlier, that when you stand, there's less reflection off the floor. So therefore, each sound has an orb that's above the floor, which is clearer towards the projection outside and less obtrusive to your fellow players. So we actually could hear each other very much clearer when we stood, and we stood closer. So even across in a line, it was no effort at all. I mean, I could hear everything just instantly. Whereas when everybody's playing into one another, it becomes a black morass of like this mud of sound that's all muddled together. And I couldn't hear everybody. No one could hear themselves, and they were not playing effectively together. So that's my take on it.
And that live in Venezuela, was it?
Yeah.
All that stuff on YouTube is just must listen for all brass students. The Empire Brass live in Venezuela.
And the funny thing is that those recordings, we had no idea they were recorded. That was we had no idea until years later. And most of those recordings, there are a couple of those pieces that Rolf was in charge of the program, and we didn't know what we were going to play. And so there was a number of the pieces, I think the water music and a couple other things. There's a few pieces where he was literally, the orchestra was coming on or the brass was coming on, and he says, let's play something. And we just played. We had no idea what was going on there. But the setup was that basic setup, and it was super clear. And we could bend to one another, we could look at one another, we could stand close to one another. You could totally hear. Important thing is that you're not close to the floor, and you were close together, so that the actual individual sounds were individual but close. And when you're in that herd and you're blowing into one another, trumpets going into one another, horn going who knows where, tuba going back up there, trombone going into the floor, into the trumpet, you've got a morass of sound that no one can track.
Tying in this sound concept idea with the idea of music education and young brass quintets and the students, I tell students two things. Number one, listen to your colleagues' sound more than to your own sound. But number two, surround yourself with musicians who are better than you, which is exactly what I have done in Quintasonic Brass. I love to listen to Vince and Matt and Alex, and I try to listen to them more than I listen to myself. And it's so much easier for me to fit into their sound. When I'm not listening to myself, I'm listening to these great players around me.
And that attitude is going to sustain you through a lifetime in music. I remember a couple of years ago, Quintasonic had a week in Michigan in February, and it was just awful weather. It was the coldest it had ever been. And I remember getting ready for that trip, and it's kind of a drag, and you got to do this. But then one of my thoughts was in motivating is I get to hear Matt Haislip and Alex Van Duuren play the introduction to Misty 4 times this week. Not Misty, sorry, to Maria. And that is just one of the things that makes me happier than anything. And I'm not playing anything. I'm just sitting there between two of my favorite musicians doing this beautiful, beautiful thing, the Jack Stamp arrangement.
Likewise.
And, that attitude of what's important to you, what's motivating you. It's I'm 43 at this point, got a couple of kids, and my energy levels are getting lower and lower every day. With my 3-year-old gets more and more active. And it's you gotta have your ladder leaning against the right wall, I think, and I'm learning that more every year.
Yeah.
We have another question here from Logan Clark. He asks, what are some good ways to practice brass quintet playing in individual practice sessions?
Yeah, Logan, that's a student of mine coming into Tennessee next year. I've been thinking about that, and one thing that I would put out there that was really formative for me when I was at Indiana was that I got into playing. I had a couple of classes where I was reading a lot of scores from the classical era, and I would put on a Mozart symphony and play along with the cello line and the bass line. This really active stuff, and you start thinking about buoyancy and time and intonation. And at the same time, a buddy of mine had the score to The Birth of the Cool with all those tuba parts. And just trying to fit into an orchestra, trying to fit into a Miles Davis group, and not just play the notes with the recording, but match and figure out what the heck that means. That did a lot for me.
I think just physically work on anything where you're respirating close to simulating playing in the group is really important as well. So I find with a lot of my students, when they're reading down things, they either sort of don't have the mental fortitude to sort of hang in and play a whole piece from top to bottom a lot of the time. So they kind of practice stopping all the time, which sort of gets them nowhere. It certainly doesn't improve that aspect of the thing. But I just find just constantly working on trying to keep the mental aspects and the physical aspects right where they need to be all the time. If I'm preparing for a program, I did a tour not long ago on brass quintets, and I hadn't played in a brass quintet probably for 5 or 6 years or something like that. And so I had to really think about that because it was a totally different set of pressures to what I'd been doing directly before that. So for me, it was just really just getting as fit as I could to because obviously you can have the trumpet on your face a lot more than what I necessarily would, especially early music. You have a lot of rests. You have all the slow movements you don't play, and then all of a sudden in a brass quintet, it's all about playing pretty much most of the time. So yeah.
I make sure that with the students, when they're coming on and they're going to be in a chamber, I say, look, first off, just get a hold of your part. Listen to the pieces, just listen to them, understand the relevance and the attitude, what's going on, and then learn your part. So when you go to the first rehearsal, you not worried about what it's going to appear, so you can figure out how it will appear in your part, in this relevance of this situation. So you're able to know your part well enough you can listen to the trombone and trumpet and tuba, and you're not so preoccupied with just counting out your rests, etc. So you know the piece well enough so you can really add to the music instead of just survive. And it's if kids don't have much experience with chamber music playing, that's a challenge, because it's like, wow, because when you get this part, there's all this here and you're not sure about it, and then you're not sure and you go in the first rehearsal not sure. It can be a hot mess. So I said, just be very responsible, listen carefully, work up your part before the first rehearsal.
A tuba player has to be a timekeeper too. And most tuba players drag. Yeah. And it's also dependent on where you're sitting. That's why I asked you that question on bell front, et cetera, et cetera. So you just got to realize that. So students should obviously know your part before the first rehearsal. Also, to stick it on a metronome. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't hurt to have that really good time, and subdivide. I think a brass quintet, a successful brass quintet, has to subdivide all the time, even if you're not aware of it. That's a habit that one must have.
One thing I do to prepare for Quintasonic Brass, for a specific example, is to prepare for what might happen. Like this last tour we did, Vince brought this wonderful but challenging piece called Voluntary by Wayland. It's basically like 4 minutes of nonstop double tonguing. And I think Vince said something like, we're going to go about 118 or 120 or something like that. But in a live setting, we might go 160 or something like that.
That's a Quintasonic 120.
That's right. Whatever Vince starts with, Vince has the first 2 bars and then I echo him. So whatever Vince starts at is what we're going to do. So I just go in knowing, we might be excited and go a lot faster or go slower. There were a couple of times where I was like, I could actually single tongue at this tempo, So be able to be flexible on either side of tempo, flexible on either side of dynamics. There have been concerts where I'm like, my goodness, we are playing so loud and I have 40 minutes left of music. Like, how's this going to work, And so I will practice louder than I expect to play, softer than I expect to play, faster than I expect to play, and slower than I expect to play. And just often students learn, like Vince was saying, you practice one piece one way, and then someone asks you to be flexible with it, and you're done, you know. And I'm so lucky with my colleagues in Quintasonic. They're so flexible and adaptable.
I with my regular, well, both the brass quintet music and also my solos, like something like the Aratunian Concerto, right? The notes are so hard for the groups. First of all, I very rarely play it because it's not usually very successful with the groups. But when I do, I start at quarter note equals 108, and I go all the way up to 144 to one, sometimes even more, because you just don't ever know what the conductor's going to do. They get all excited about starting, all of a sudden they're going, you know, and if you're not ready for that, well, you're going to be hung out to dry. You know, they're not going to slow down. They've done it. They practiced that way for 2 months. So either you figure out how to do it. So I try to do like Jason. I those kinds of pieces where there could be a 20 beat per minute, you know, difference because you're not playing with professional musicians. I don't really worry about it with Quintasonic. We're usually pretty steady as far as the tempos. But you know, for me, depending on what I'm doing, what part I'm playing. When I was in faculty brass quintet, I always practiced my hardest the very first week or two that we got the music, so that I could really set a good example, you know, for what I thought we might do. And I never talked very much, believe it or not, in rehearsals. You know, I just played, and I tried to really be a very detailed in how I, you know, and I thought that should be enough. So I think that's really the preparation again. That's for everybody. It doesn't really matter what part you're playing. And I always like to, you know, I don't really like to count, you know, I have to, but I don't like it. But I like to follow the piece.
Yeah, but you know, you're talking on a professional level. You guys rehearse a lot. We're talking also too about the students. You know, they're going to play maybe 3 months together, and then you know, that's where I say you got to know your part. You got to come in, and particularly say, for example, you're going to get a sub, go play with another brass quintet. Someone got sick. You know, and the message I always try to feel like, I think Harvey Phillips said it. He says, you know, make the other guy sound good. As a result, you sound better yourself, but know your part. And I think I'm just repeating what everybody is saying. You know, but when you're in a group like you guys, you're used to it. The same with St. Louis. We get together. We don't rehearse. We know the program a year in advance. You know, and that was a different story because we can only go out for 10 days, and I never saw him until next year, maybe. And I would imagine you guys are going to be the same way.
Yes, we are. One of my favorite Arnold Jacobs quotes was when talking about ensemble playing. He said his advice is don't compete, complement. Yeah. And if you can think of that as being your primary goal as a performer, how are you complementing? How are you helping out the other people in the ensemble?
That's called a musician. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a great segue into a wrap up.
I think so too.
For our Facebook audience, thanks for bearing with our technical difficulties. I think we've been good for the last chunk of this. We're recording this, so I will save this and I'll put this like on YouTube for permanent archive. So if you missed the first half, thank you so much to our special guests and the wealth of knowledge you shared with us and our audience. I learned so much myself. This is just living legends among us, and this has been a real honor for us. And it's been a privilege for me to see my colleagues again, and I was hoping to see you in a couple of weeks at ITG, but I hope to see you soon. We'll do something as soon as we're allowed to leave Kentucky, I guess. Right now, we're not allowed to go anywhere.
I have my ankle bracelet on.
Yeah.
Miss you guys. Can't wait to see everybody again.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I learned so much. Had a great time. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. Thank you.
All.
Yeah, thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you. Your place was absolutely spectacular bed breakfast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.